It was raining so hard the headlights on passing cars looked like smeared gold streaks on a canvas of gray. The wind slapped against my face, slicing through my jacket like it wasn't even there. I clutched the brown paper bag tighter to my chest. Inside were the last fever meds I could afford for Eli. His temperature had spiked again, nearly 103. I had 2 more days till payday, nothing left in the fridge but half a carton of eggs and 3 slices of bread, and 5 kids waiting at home with a dying heater and too much silence. And yet, this damn rain felt like the last straw. I stepped off the curb, glancing both ways. No car in sight. My boots hit the crosswalk, just as a roar of an engine came from around the bend. Headlights exploded into view, blinding white. I froze. For one terrifying moment, I couldn't move. My mind went blank except for the image of Eli's flushed little face, damp with sweat, calling for me. Then a tug. Hard. Someone yanked my arm and dragged me backward, just as the SUV blew past, sending a tidal wave of gutter water up my legs. I stumbled onto the sidewalk, dazed, the paper bag still miraculously intact. I turned and saw her. She was old, maybe 70 or more. Her coat was worn and wet at the hem. Her knit hat sagged with rain, and her scarf was frayed, but her spine was impossibly straight. She looked at me with a calm, piercing gaze, like she'd just rescued me from a burning house and wasn't quite done yet. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" she asked. Her voice was gentle but firm. It wasn't the voice of someone asking out of politeness. It was the voice of someone who'd been a mother or a teacher or both. I opened my mouth to say yes, but the word caught somewhere between embarrassment and adrenaline. Yeah, thank you. I didn't see it. My son's sick. I trailed off, realizing I was rambling to a stranger in the middle of a storm. She smiled, faint but kind. No harm done. But rushing across like that, life's not something we can replace, dear. I nodded, still shaken. I glanced toward the bus shelter nearby, grateful just to get out of the rain for a moment. We sat together on the wooden bench, the wind howling at our backs. She didn't talk much, just stared into the mist like she was reading something the rest of us couldn't see. I should have gotten up. I should have said thank you and left. But instead, I told her about Eli, about Maddie stepping in as the man of the house since my husband died, about the missed shifts and the heating bill and the babysitter who quit last week without warning, about the ache behind my ribs that had been living there for months, curling deeper each time I handed over $1 I couldn't spare. She listened. She didn't interrupt. And when I was done, she looked at me and said the one thing I didn't expect. "I could help," she said simply, "with your children. I'm good with little ones. Used to teach a long time ago. No pay needed. I just need a place to stay. And maybe a reason to get up in the morning." I blinked at her. Was she crazy? A homeless woman offering to babysit my kids? Every red flag in my brain went off. But her voice wasn't desperate. It was measured, clear. Her eyes didn't flicker like a con artist. They held steady like stone. "My name's Evelyn," she added, as if that explained everything. I should have said no. God knows I had every reason to say no. But something in me, maybe exhaustion, maybe instinct, said yes. Or maybe it was something else entirely. She walked home with me that night. The 6 blocks back to our building felt quieter than usual, like the town itself was holding its breath. I unlocked the door to our small second-floor apartment and stepped inside, unsure if I was bringing in a blessing or a mistake. And when my kids looked up and saw her, tired, dripping wet, smiling with the kind of warmth they hadn't seen in years, they didn't scream or hide behind me. Natalie walked right up and offered her a towel. There were shoes everywhere. "That's the first thing Evelyn said the next morning as she stood in the hallway, watching my kids scramble for socks and backpacks. "How do you ever find a matching pair?" she asked, a soft smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. I laughed because the truth was I didn't. 5 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment means chaos isn't a visitor. It's a tenant. But somehow, Evelyn moved through the noise like she belonged. Not as a guest. Not even as a stranger. As if she'd been here all along and we just hadn't noticed. By noon, she'd already cooked oatmeal, taught Natalie how to separate whites from colors in the laundry, calmed Eli from a coughing fit, and gotten Leon to eat a banana without a fight. That alone felt like a miracle. And when I left for work, she was helping Maddie with his science homework at the kitchen table, as if nothing about this was unusual. I didn't tell anyone at the clinic. What would I even say? I picked up a live-in nanny from the sidewalk last night. No one would understand, except maybe Nina. Nina Sanchez was the kind of woman you wanted on your team in a crisis. Sharp eyes, faster hands, and a mouth that could cut through BS like a scalpel. We weren't close, but we worked the same shifts often enough that she knew my story. Or parts of it. "Everything okay with the kids?" she asked that night as we stocked supplies for the next day. "Better, actually," I said. They have someone home with them now. Someone kind." She glanced at me. "You find a sitter?" Something like that. She didn't press. But later, as we clocked out, she followed me into the break room. "You watch your back, Lillian," she said quietly. "The world's full of people who look kind, especially when you're desperate." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I didn't have the words to explain Evelyn. There was something about her, a stillness, like she'd seen too much to be rattled. And yet, in her silence, there was no weight, no darkness, just steadiness. I came home to the smell of roast chicken. Let me repeat that, roast chicken. I hadn't cooked a full meal in weeks. Between my double shifts and Maddie's school schedule, dinner had become something you threw together from boxes and cans. But Evelyn had somehow made it feel like Sunday, even though it was Wednesday and payday was still 2 days away. The kids were already in their pajamas. Maddie was reading aloud from a book, and the little ones were curled up on the couch, heads resting against each other like puppies in a pile. For a moment, I just stood there in the doorway, coat still wet from the rain, keys in hand, heart aching in that strange, sharp way it does when something feels almost too good to trust. She looked up and smiled. They brushed their teeth already. Natalie has her homework in her bag, and I think Eli's finally breaking that fever. "Thank you," I whispered. It wasn't enough, but it was all I could give. Later, after the kids were asleep, we sat at the kitchen table with mugs of weak tea and tired eyes. "I should be scared," I told her, "letting someone I don't know into my home." She didn't take offense. She just nodded slowly. "You're not the only one who's scared, dear. I haven't known where I belong in a long time." There was a pause. She looked down at her cup. Her hands were steady, but I noticed the way she rubbed the rim with her thumb over and over, like trying to remember something lost. "I don't remember much," she said finally, "only that I used to love literature, that I taught, that I was someone who mattered." "You still matter," I said. The words surprised me, but I meant them. The next morning, while packing Maddie's lunch, I found a note tucked into his binder. It was written in elegant cursive, signed with a simple EB. It was a quote from Emerson, something about courage. I didn't say anything, but I folded it carefully and put it in my own pocket. It started with a cough, just a small one, dry, barely noticeable. Maddie had always been the strong one, the reliable one. He didn't complain, didn't cry when he scraped a knee, didn't ask for help unless he truly needed it. So when I noticed him sitting too still at the breakfast table, his cereal untouched, eyes shadowed and distant, my gut twisted. "You okay, sweetheart?" I asked, brushing a hand across his forehead. No fever, but his skin felt pale somehow, if that makes sense. "I'm fine," Mommy said. "Just tired." I wanted to believe him. God knows I did. But that afternoon, Evelyn caught me in the hallway, her expression unusually tight. "Maddie's breathing a little too fast," she said, and he winced when he sat down. "I don't want to worry you, but I think it's worth a closer look." I didn't hesitate. We were in the pediatric ER by evening. Maddie curled against me on the plastic bench, his hand clutching mine like he hadn't done since he was 6. The walls were mint green, the kind they probably thought looked calming, but to me it always looked like old toothpaste. We waited for hours, flu season, overworked nurses, charts being shuffled like playing cards. Eventually they called his name. I walked beside him through narrow halls that smelled like sanitizer and fatigue. The nurse did vitals, then blood work, then an EKG. The words started coming fast. Irregular rhythm, needs ultrasound, previous rheumatic fever? I blinked. When he was 6, I said, but it passed. They said he recovered. They exchanged a look, one of those tight-lipped, worried ones. The pediatric cardiologist was a woman named Dr. Latimer. Gray bob, no nonsense, clipboard in hand. She sat us down and showed me the screen. Even I could see it, the valve wasn't closing right. Blood was flowing backward. It's called mitral valve regurgitation, she said, and it's progressed significantly. He'll need surgery. I felt the air go out of the room. When? I asked. Soon, she replied. We'll try to get him into the surgical rotation within the next few months. Months? Her face softened. I'm sorry. It's not ideal, but we're backed up. Unless you can transfer him to a private cardiac center, it may take time. Time. The one thing I didn't have. That night, I barely slept. Maddie was back home, exhausted, tucked under extra blankets, while Evelyn sat by his bedside, reading softly from Treasure Island. I stood in the doorway, watching them, heart cracking open in places I didn't know were still vulnerable. He looked so small, so breakable. In the kitchen, I finally broke down, not with screams or sobs. Just quiet tears, the kind you cry into your sleeve because you can't afford to fall apart. Not when you have 5 mouths to feed and 1 child who might not make it if you don't do something. Anything. Evelyn came in a few minutes later. She didn't ask questions, just handed me a mug of chamomile tea and sat down across from me. We'll find a way, she said. You're not alone in this. Her words were simple, but they landed like an anchor in my storm. The next morning, after I dropped off prescriptions and called in sick from what used to be my job, I sat at the library computer scrolling through hospital websites I couldn't afford. Every page blurred together, waitlists, specialists, forms I didn't know how to fill. Then I remembered her name, Evelyn Brooks. I typed it into the search bar, not really expecting anything. But what popped up made my breath catch. Teacher of the Year, Evelyn Brooks, 1997. A photo, younger, but unmistakably her, standing on a school stage, holding a plaque. And next to her, a teenage boy with dark eyes and a wide, shy grin. Rodney Brooks, state finalist, National History Olympiad. My heart started to race. That night, when I showed Evelyn the photo, her fingers trembled as she touched the screen. Her eyes welled, not with fear, but with the shock of something finally clicking into place. That's my son, she whispered. Henry Brooks. He loved old maps, always wanted to be an explorer. I leaned forward. Do you want to find him? She looked at me, steadier now than I'd ever seen her. Yes, before it's too late. Henry Brooks lived in Columbus, just under 2 hours from our town. I found his faculty profile on a university website. He was a senior researcher in American historical documents. His bio mentioned published books, curated exhibits, even a podcast on archival preservation. It didn't mention a mother. I stared at his photo for a long time. He looked like Evelyn, the same quiet intensity, the same chin, just sharper with age. I printed the page, folded it twice, and handed it to her over breakfast. I don't want to intrude, I said, but if you're ready, I'll drive. Evelyn ran her fingers along the crease of the paper. He thinks I'm dead, she murmured. If he ever looked. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. We left the next morning. Maddie kissed her on the cheek and whispered something in her ear I couldn't hear. The little ones waved from the balcony like we were off to war. The sky was low and gray, but the air was warmer than I expected. The drive was quiet, not awkward, just thoughtful. Every now and then, Evelyn would ask about the kids or comment on a tree that reminded her of something. But mostly, she looked out the window like she was scanning for memories along the roadside. Henry's home was nothing like I expected. A restored brick Victorian tucked between two modern townhouses in a quiet historic district. Iron railings, deep green shutters, a library visible through the front window. It looked like the kind of place where the past could sit down and have tea with the present. I rang the bell. A long pause. Then a voice crackled through the intercom. "Can I help you?" "Mr. Brooks," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "My name is Lillian Carter. I think I've found someone important to you." Another long pause. I could hear my own breath. Then the lock clicked. He opened the door slowly. Tall, neatly dressed, older than the photo, and wary. His eyes scanned me, then drifted over to Evelyn, standing quietly on the sidewalk behind me. He didn't recognize her. Not at first. But then she said one word. "Roddy," she whispered. His face changed. Like a storm passed through him in a blink. He stepped forward, hesitant, then stopped. His lips parted, but nothing came out. Evelyn reached into her pocket and pulled out a silver locket. I'd never seen it before. She held it out. "I kept this, even when I forgot everything else." He took it, opened it, saw the photo inside. The photo of them, him as a boy, her younger, brighter, laughing in sunlight. Then he fell into her arms, and the years between them dissolved. They talked for hours. I left them alone in the study, the walls lined with books, old maps, pieces of the past labeled and protected. I wandered the kitchen, the hallway, the garden out back with its stone bench and rusted sundial. And when Evelyn called for me, her voice was stronger than I'd ever heard it. "She remembers everything," Henry told me, tears still clinging to his lashes. "Not all at once, but enough." We drove back as the sun was setting behind low hills. Evelyn was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not lost, just full. Maddie was waiting when we returned. He was curled on the couch with a blanket, Evelyn's copy of The Secret Garden resting on his chest. His breathing was shallow again, his skin too pale. "I think," he said softly, "I need to go back to the hospital." I nodded, brushing his hair from his forehead. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with the knowledge that time was running out. And this time I would not wait. The emergency room felt colder this time, not in temperature, but in spirit. The walls hadn't changed. The chairs were still blue and plastic. The fluorescent lights still hummed. But I could feel it in my bones. This visit was different. Maddie lay on the hospital bed with a monitor clipped to his finger, his breath shallow, his eyes ringed with gray. The cardiologist didn't sugarcoat it. His valve had worsened, the damage now classified as severe. He needed surgery. Not in months, not in weeks, in days. "But there's a wait list," she said gently. "And even with expedited referral, we're looking at 6 to 8 weeks before we can schedule him in." 6 to 8 weeks. I stared at her, stunned, trying to form words while Maddie lay beside me, too tired to lift his head. Back home that night, I couldn't stop pacing. Evelyn sat in the living room, reading to the kids, pretending everything was normal. I knew she was just trying to keep them calm, but I could see the worry in her posture, the way she paused between lines, the flicker in her voice. I stepped into the hallway, pulled out my phone, and called Henry. I didn't know what I was going to say. I just needed someone to hear me. He picked up after the first ring. "He's getting worse," I said, not bothering with hello. "They said weeks." "I don't have weeks." There was a silence on the line. Then, "I know someone at the State Cardiology Center, a former colleague of my father's. Let me make a call." The next morning, Henry drove up from Columbus in his old Volvo. He didn't say much when he arrived, just handed me a folder with the logo of the Ohio Heart Institute stamped in gold. I made an appointment for tomorrow morning. They'll do a full workup, and if he qualifies, they'll admit him under a clinical trial. It's minimally invasive, faster recovery, covered by research funding. I stared at the folder like it was a lottery ticket I didn't buy. "I can't repay you," I whispered. He looked at me, and for the first time, there was no distance in his eyes. "You gave me my mother back. There's nothing else to say." We left before dawn. The hospital was bright and clean, full of glass and soft colors. It felt less like a place for dying and more like a place for trying. Maddie was quiet through most of the intake. When the nurse gave him a warm blanket, he finally whispered, "Is this going to work, Mom?" I didn't lie. "I hope so, baby. I really, really hope so." The surgical team was kind, efficient. They walked us through everything. The risks, the timeline, the consent forms. I signed them all with a hand that trembled only a little. Evelyn sat by Maddie's side and read to him from Moby Dick, her voice steady as waves. Henry paced in the hallway, talking to doctors, texting updates to friends in research, making connections I didn't even know existed. And I just sat. I held my son's hand and tried to memorize his face in case. The morning of the surgery, Maddie pulled me close. "If something happens," he said, "can you tell Dad I was brave?" My throat closed. I kissed his forehead. He already knows. Then they wheeled him away. The surgery lasted 4 hours. I sat with Henry and Evelyn in the family waiting lounge, sipping coffee I didn't taste. Evelyn clutched a rosary I didn't know she owned. Henry sat silently, knees bouncing, fingers drumming his jeans. When the surgeon walked in, still in scrubs, I stopped breathing. "It went well," he said. "We repaired the valve. No complications. He's in recovery now." I didn't cry. I folded forward, hands covering my mouth, and let the breath I'd been holding for days leave me all at once. It wasn't sobbing. It wasn't hysteria. It was relief, sharp and deep and alive. Maddie would live. Maddie came home a week later with a chest full of stitches and a new brightness in his eyes. He walked slower, tired easily, but he smiled more. And when he did, it reached all the way into the corners of the room. Henry invited us to stay for a while. "Just until things settle," he said, but the way he looked at the kids chasing each other around his garden told a different story. It wasn't about convenience. It was about belonging. His home wasn't just beautiful, it was curious, like a museum you wanted to live in. Wooden shelves held weathered atlases and delicate scrolls. The walls were lined with framed maps, photos from archaeological sites, tiny artifacts in shadow boxes. The dining table was long and sturdy, made for stories and elbows and laughter. The kids were enchanted. Natalie loved the attic, full of old paintings. Leon couldn't stop asking about the globe that spun on its own. Daisy asked Henry daily if pirates were real. Eli called Evelyn Grandma Val by the third day unprompted. One afternoon, Leon found something buried in the garden. He came racing into the kitchen, muddy hands holding a small, tarnished coin. "We found treasure," he shouted. Henry inspected it, then smiled. "That's a 19th century trade token. Not quite gold, but still pretty special." Suddenly, the backyard became a dig site. The kids spent hours combing through flower beds and behind hedges. They didn't care if they found anything else. The magic was already real. That night, Evelyn and I sat on the back porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. She wore a soft shawl over her shoulders, her fingers laced around a cup of mint tea. "I used to dream about this," she said. "Not the house, not even the reunion. Just peace. A kitchen with children's voices. A place where I wasn't lost." "You're not lost anymore," I said. She smiled. "Neither are you." A few days later, Henry found me in the hallway holding Maddie's latest drawing, an old sailing ship with tall masts and stitched sails. "He wants to learn about naval explorers," Henry said. "He's asking for books on Captain Cook." I laughed. We might have created a monster. "I like this kind of monster," he said softly. There was a pause. "I've been thinking," he added. "The house is too big for one man and his maps." I turned to him slowly. "I'm not asking anything," he said. "Not yet. I like having you here. I like being here, I whispered. That weekend, we hosted our first family dinner at the long dining table. Evelyn cooked a roast with rosemary. The kids helped set the table, clumsily but proudly. Maddie wore a button-up shirt and declared himself captain of the kitchen crew. After dessert, Henry brought out an old projector and showed us scanned photos from his parents' travels. Val's younger years, his father's lectures, their trip to Greece in the 90s. The kids gasped and giggled at every photo. Evelyn teared up more than once. Later that night, when everyone else had gone to bed, I found Maddie standing by the riverbank behind the house. He held something small in his hands. "It's the boat Dad and I built," he said quietly. "The one I saved." I nodded. I remembered that boat. Tiny, carved from pine, with sails made of old linen and a hull glued too many times. "I want to let it go," he said. "Not to forget him. Just to thank him for loving us." I knelt beside him and helped him place the boat in the water. It wobbled, then caught the current, gliding forward like it knew where it was going. "Goodbye, Dad," Maddie whispered. "We're okay now." I wrapped my arm around him, and we watched the boat drift until it disappeared beyond the bend. Autumn settled gently over the house like a well-worn quilt. The garden blazed with gold and rust, the trees whispering secrets with every breeze. The air smelled like cinnamon and soil, and inside the house echoed with the rhythm of a new life. Slow, steady, real. Every Friday we had family dinners. Non-negotiable. Evelyn read poems before dessert. The kids took turns sharing their discovery of the week. And Henry just watched us sometimes, quiet, smiling in that way of his, like he still couldn't quite believe we were real. Evelyn had become something of a sensation online. Her blog, The Gentle Page, was a hit among young teachers across the country. She shared lesson plans, reflections on classic literature, and thoughts on kindness. Her memory hadn't just returned, it had bloomed. Maddie was thriving. His recovery stunned the doctors. He was stronger, more curious, more open. His YouTube channel, Captain Maddie's Voyages, had 50 subscribers, mostly other kids who liked history and hand-drawn maps. Henry helped him film. I helped him edit. It became our little side project. Natalie had taken up painting. Daisy wanted to be an astronomer. Leon was still convinced we were living above a buried pirate ship. Eli had learned how to say compass and insisted on carrying one in his pocket like a proper explorer. And me? I was working again, part-time this time, at a local clinic with better pay, better hours, and no one like Dr. Hale lurking in the halls. I had time for my children. I had time for dinner. I had time for breath. One afternoon, while Evelyn and I were folding laundry, she looked at me over the basket and asked, "Do you ever miss the apartment?" I thought for a moment, then smiled. No, I miss what it represented, maybe. The fight, the grit, but not the walls, not the silence. "Good," she said, folding one of Eli's tiny shirts with care, "because this feels like home." It had been almost 2 months since Henry made the offer. "Move in," he'd said. "Make this house yours, too." I hadn't answered right away. I wasn't ready. I'd spent so long surviving that the idea of settling felt dangerous. But that night, by the riverbank, as we watched Maddie's little boat disappear into the gold of the sunset, I knew. It was time. "I think we're ready," I told Henry a few days later, sitting beside him on the back porch. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't need to. His hand found mine warm and steady. "Welcome home," he said simply. That Friday's dinner felt different, lighter, brighter. The table was full of food, of stories of belonging. Evelyn recited an old poem she wrote in her 20s about wind and resilience. Maddie presented a hand-drawn map of the Ohio River. Natalie brought down a watercolor of the house at dusk. Everyone clapped. And me? I just sat for a moment and listened. To the voices, the laughter, the life. I looked around that long wooden table and realized We weren't just guests anymore. We were family. We had been all along. And somehow, against every odd, we'd made it through the storm. We'd found our way home.